cab driver, Mr. Cab Driver.
820 here, Big 550 KTRS. A lot has been made over the last couple of days and weeks about Uber, the ride-sharing app, which is in metropolitan areas that are larger than St. Louis and smaller than St. Louis. It's in Kansas City, Kansas, as well as Kansas City, Missouri. It's also in Columbia. One of the taxi cab commissioners, Chris Summers, joins us. We had Kim Tucci on yesterday, who sits on the Taxi Cab Commission. Chris Summers, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Good morning.
All right. The argument is that Uber is saying that the regulations that the Taxi Cab Commission wants to place on it is too onerous. Would you agree?
I agree.
If that's the case, why not make the taxi cab current regulations the same as Uber? In other words, if Uber says they're too restrictive, and they are, why then force the current taxi cab drivers with that onerous one? Why not make the new regulations so that both can live in the same world?
I agree that that is absolutely a path to getting this done. And I personally have never asked for anything special for Uber. Or I just personally believe, having researched this for the last 18 months, from when I very first time I brought the concept of Uber and an Uber representative into the mayor's office in January of 2014. But I believe that whatever is potentially changed for Uber should apply to the cab companies. If they want to use a third-party background check company, so long as the MTC approves that approval process, which happens all the time in many, many industries, it should apply for any vehicle for hire entity. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, though, the MTC, I believe, just by its very nature with industry folks on the commission, doesn't need to regulate TNCs, or transportation network companies as they're called, e.g. Lyft and Uber. It is very easy for them to make basically one line of code change to recuse themselves of jurisdiction. But, and that's the argument that...
So are you saying that Uber and Lyft drivers aren't the same as taxi cab drivers?
I don't believe they are. It's a fundamentally different business model in that the drivers are using their own cars.
Right.
The taxi companies these days are basically leasing companies.
Okay.
At the bigger companies, $85 a day. Drivers go pick up a car, and they don't make a dime until they pay for their gas and that $85.
Right.
So it's sort of this indentured model where the drivers are beholden to that company. Mm-hmm. And that leads to the reason that people want Uber in cities like St. Louis and across the country is that at the end of the night, there aren't enough cabs. But an Uber driver, because they're not $85 in the hole every time they get behind the wheel.
Right, certainly understandable. There's different models. There are different business models. And the taxi cab is a model that worked 20 years ago. Maybe it doesn't work today. But when I'm getting into a cab and I want to go down to the grocery store, what do I care? The business arrangement between the driver and the owner of that car, whether it's his wife, his grandmother, his buddy's car that he's borrowing or whatever else, or borrowing it or leasing it from the other taxi cab commission. I want a safe and secure ride regardless of who I hire to take me there.
So I would say, yes, as you should have that expectation. But what's good enough for Kansas City, the Metro East, St. Charles, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and basically every other city in the country should be good enough for St. Louis. But I would argue that if I hail a cab on the street, which I do all the time because I moved here from a big city, or if I'm at a hotel and a bellhop grabs me a cab, I have no idea who that cab company is. I know nothing about that driver. The company, I've never heard of the company. I don't get to choose the company. So there's definitely an expectation that it has been vetted somehow, right? But if I get on a private company's app, I know I'm going directly to one particular company. I'm putting my trust in that company. Now, I'm not saying that, again, those drivers should not be vetted and should not have a background check. But as Mayor Slay is saying, and I believe you're going to see it from some top law enforcement officers very soon, it's good enough for them. They believe that the background check is thorough. It's the depth and the breadth of it is as strong, and with my research of 18 months now, probably deeper and wider than what is going on today with the MTC. But I'm also not saying that if we open this up and allow a third party to do the background checks for Uber, that the same flexibility should not be there for the taxi cabs.
So you're saying what's good for Uber, if it's good enough for Uber to have a third party, then it's good enough for the current taxi cab drivers and businesses.
Correct.
Kim Tucci says it costs $50. Is that true? And if so, what's the big deal? Why is Uber complaining if it's just $50 for a background check?
I don't know if $50 is probably the right amount. But first, before a driver to get on board with the MTC currently, they have to go physically to the Department of Motor Vehicles, pick up a driver check. They have to go to either St. Louis County Police Department or St. Louis City Police Department and get a background check that's run through Regis. And then they need to bring that to the MTC, where they fill out an application, then they get a code. They need to go then to a third-party place, get a fingerprint, send that into the Missouri Highway Patrol before they're fully licensed. Now, granted, in the process of waiting for the fingerprint check, the MTC does allow them to drive. There's a 30-day window. But there's multiple steps there, right? What I would also argue, they have to go around town to pick up all these different pieces of paper. The background check process that the MTC uses, and a lot of cab jurisdictions across the country use, is 30 plus years old. Before the advent of these third parties that can aggregate this data. The data didn't exist. So you had to go to the Missouri Highway Patrol to get it because they were the only ones who had it. Now this data, there are companies that are in the business of providing background checks. And I have spent a lot of time researching this, talking to people, talking to Regis, talking to cops, talking to many other people to understand how thorough the checks are that in this case Uber uses. And I believe that they are actually more thorough. They look across the whole country. They look at magazine subscriptions that you've had to find old addresses so they can look in that jurisdiction to find any infractions that you've had. I believe, and I'm rather certain, that the MTC's checks are a little bit more parochial and regional in their breadth. And we know that a lot of people who drive vehicles for hire move around. They're from outside of the country. So it's not as though people all grew up in the St. Louis metro area.
There are people who say, Chris Summers, who sits on the Taxi Cab Commission, that their state law says that you, as a regulatory body, must license these drivers, and that if you want to change that, it has to be a state statute.
So a couple things there. The state statute actually says the regional taxi commissions, of which the MTC is one, may regulate. We don't have to. You can read it. It says we may regulate. So we could the MTC as commissioners could say, we don't need to do this. Let's leave it to the Board of Aldermen. Let's leave it to the county council, and that's what happened in Kansas City. But ignoring that word may versus must or is required to, the MTC has lobbyists in Jeff City to make sure that the statute doesn't change. They changed the definition of vehicle for hire to be more all-encompassing and broad so that Uber and Lyft fall under its jurisdiction. They didn't have to do that. We could also very easily change that. But they want to do it. The MTC wants to regulate it. They're not being forced to do it. They want to do it. Furthermore, before the sexting gate in Jeff City, the Missouri legislature was going to take this on as a statewide issue. And due to the sexting gate, everything, it fell off of the legislative agenda. But the MTC claims, and its legal counsel claims, that our hand is being forced. We have to do this by the Missouri legislature. Well, Missouri legislature is not really a fan of regulation, as you know, and they want Uber done, and they want it on a statewide level. They as we know, they love to manage everything on a statewide level and preempt local jurisdictions. The
criticism of the Taxi Cab Commission is that they keep moving the goal line. Every time Uber agrees to something, they change it, make it just further away so that Uber can't agree to it. Is it true that there is some type of stall tactic going on, that the current taxi cab companies that are a part of this commission are changing the goal line to make it impossible for Uber to come to St. Louis?
Well, I'll say a couple of things here. That back in July of last year when I was appointed to the commission, our esteemed chairman ran into a mutual friend of ours. And I'll say that the chairman was at my wedding. This is a guy who I used to be friends with. But he told
this is Lou Hamilton, who called you on Twitter an insufferable douche.
Yes.
Okay.
He told another prominent member of the community that Summers will lose and I will win. This is a man who has not wanted to get this done. This is a man who claimed publicly at the meeting that Uber only approached them in May of this year, and that, hey, I'm moving this at a rapid pace. I've been working with Uber since October on this. The mayor's office has been working with Uber since October on this. It's a bold-faced lie. But as far as moving the goalpost, that's hard to say, but what I will say is that the MTC showed its hand last week that it is not negotiating, it is not making concessions, asking for a swab of every driver's mouth. It is not making any concessions for Uber whatsoever. So is it moving the goalpost? I don't know, but it's not negotiating, it's not making concessions, it's not compromising, and that was the hand that was shown. And if Lou Hamilton and the other commissioners think that they are going to present code changes at this July 29th meeting and say, we did it, well, that's not anything that Uber's going to apply for. Just like Uber didn't go forward with the free rides this week because they don't want their drivers to have to go down to the MTC and get a swab of their mouth.
I think there's a point where the Uber's just going to say, okay, we're done. Hands up. We give up.
Well, I would like to say if the MTC proceeds, as I believe they will, with code changes that Uber will not apply for, Lyft will not apply for, I say they just move forward. And if they want to get a temporary, if the MTC wants to get a temporary restraining order against them, so be it. But it's a fight that I think I hope that Uber will take, because there's not many people who are in favor of the MTC as it is right now, and definitely not this guiding force from the Missouri legislature who, Lou and Neil Buntridger have claimed is the reason that they have to.
How many people are on this taxi cab commission?
There are 9 on the board on the commission.
How many people support you and your philosophy to get Uber approved as soon as possible?
I would say potentially one other, but there is one outstanding seat that County Executive Stenger needs to appoint. I think he should also replace the chairman, who has shown that he is not negotiating in good faith and is not a good representative for the public safety of St. Louis. So if we could replace the chairman and this open seat with a couple of progressives, or people who are at least open to some forward thinking and adapting policy to new technologies. That's the thing, and that's what Mayor Slay said, which I think was insightful, is that new technology should not have to adapt to old regulations. So regulations should adapt to the current market conditions, which are new technologies, new business models that didn't exist when the MTC was created.
Chris Summers with the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission. We are way late on time, but let me ask you this exit question, and that is this. How does this end? Where do you see this going, and how long does it take to get there?
I wish I had a crystal ball. As I said, I hope that Uber will move forward. I would like it to be regulated, just as most other private businesses are, but I don't necessarily believe the MTC is that body to regulate it. I think potentially we could get to a point where there is a temporary license granted to Uber, or potentially Lyft as well if they would choose to get it, while we work this out either at the Board of Aldermen level, the County Council level, potentially the MTC, but I think most appropriately at the state level, so companies like Uber don't have to go into every little municipality and seek their approval.
Sounds like, well, they're in southern Illinois. It sounds like they're going to be in St. Charles really soon, right? So yes. The city and the county are the final holdouts.
I think it's very sad that you could hop an Uber from Edwardsville to go to a Cards game, but you can't get a ride back.
That's Chris Summers, Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission. We should also say you are the owner of Pi. How many locations?
8.
8. Do you have any in Washington, D.C. for President Obama?
We have one there where we're fortunate enough that the First Lady has been in, and we're in the process of doing another one.
Do you have a President Obama special? What's his pie of choice?
He ate most recently sort of a smorgasbord, but the Lincoln Park and the Southside Classico were those where I got the best feedback.
So do you deliver it to the White House, or do they come in?
You know what? They were convinced. So Air Force One, when they've been through St. Louis, they call me from the plane after they already have it, but they can't tell us ahead of time. Otherwise, then they need to do the big Secret Service search. But when the First Lady was there, they plant people in the kitchen. And they truly have tasters, which is really interesting. So they will have these guys who are on the Navy mess chef team. They will actually take a bite of the pizza, and so it's sort of this trust level. If I can feed this guy a piece of pizza, and he just takes a bite, and then it's good enough for the First Lady that I'm not trying to do anything nefarious.
Hopefully someday they can take a pie from Pie and have an Uber driver deliver it to Air Force One.
That is actually where I believe Uber is going, is this sort of on-demand delivery service. And it's basically a bunch of people who have cars and excess time, and that is actually where they're going. They've pulled some PR stunts recently where they deliver puppies and they deliver Christmas trees at the holidays. And it's basically a driver who's got an app, and he gets summoned to go pick up a pizza, go pick up a rider, go pick up a puppy dog.
Chris Summers, thanks for checking in.
Thank you.
8:36, Big 550.